Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Robertson here, bringing you guys another Space Engineers showcase video. And contrary to what you might think, no, I will not be showcasing the extremely well done Sedna City DailyTrade landing zone by Errix. Instead, I am merely using it to showcase another creation, one of mine in fact. That's right folks, given the insane popularity of the Dunsworth Civilian Starcruiser on Mod.io, I've decided to record this showcase for the Xbox version of the spacecraft, which, luckily, given the nature of this particular vessel, means that it only differs from the Steam version in that it doesn't use any scripts. Instead, it relies on timer blocks to automatically close all the interior doors and cycle the airlocks and hangar bay doors. But that's something that you guys will see soon enough, so let's make our way towards this Starcruiser and board it using the crew and cargo elevator. Once we get inside, those of you who are already familiar with the Theseus and Atalanta class Starcruisers will notice that the layout is virtually identical. Now, this is because this is just a civilian variant of the aforementioned spacecraft, and as such, all of the rooms inside will be the same, except that one or two may differ from those used by the CDF and Terran Space Force, mainly just to reflect the civilian nature of this vessel. As with the Atalanta and Asterion Starcruisers, the elevator is the main means of getting on board, but unlike the Atalanta class, the Dunsworth has ladder access directly to the levels where the living quarters and CIC are located, as, unlike its military counterparts, there isn't the same need for security. As well as ladder access from here, we also have a doorway that leads into the propellant and cargo bay. This too can be used to access the other areas of this vessel. You'll notice that only red emergency lighting is used in this section, as it's considered to be a secondary area that only members of the crew are permitted to visit. Indeed, during long voyages, it's not uncommon to depressurize this section entirely in order to save oxygen. These small cargo containers are actually linked to the conveyor network that spans throughout this vessel, and it will give you access to two larger ones that are located deeper within this spacecraft. And as expected, here at the rear of the vessel we have the reactor room and engineering, complete with 4 jump drives and 2 large nuclear reactors, which provide more than enough power to allow the vessel to keep manoeuvring using its ion engines even while recharging the jump drives, which themselves have a maximum range of 1,850 kilometers. Now, these walkways aren't just for scenery, they also allow the ship's crew to gain access to all the conveyors and hydrogen tanks located in this section, as well as to the doorways that lead to the spaces between the outer and inner hulls, which is vital when performing maintenance, and can be a huge help when you're trying to save on jetpack fuel. In fact, I'll show you what I mean in just a few seconds. Here we are. This doorway lets us enter into the space between the two hulls, which, as you can see, is not pressurized, and is really just to let the crew perform repairs on the conveyor system and some of these other non-essential devices that have been fitted in here. The double hull design is something of a carryover from the military Starcruisers, as the outer hull sort of acts like a Whipple shield against meteoroid strikes and the explosive warheads used by rockets and the smaller player-made missiles. Anyway, what I'll do now is I'll quickly head on through the living quarters, but rather than stop there as such, I'll carry on until I reach the ladder access corridor so that you can see how it connects the room of the cargo elevator to the rest of the decks on the Dunsworth. There it is. As I mentioned earlier, this is something that's only been added to the Dunsworth class, mainly to give the crew slightly faster access between the command deck and the boarding elevator. These ladders don't exist in the Atalanta class, as it's preferred that any intruders that board using the airlock or the crew elevator are forced to either grind their way through the vessel or fight along a set route that's protected by both the defending crew and interior turrets. Once again, this is just another section that you can go into that sits between the inner and outer hull, mainly just used to conduct emergency repairs. There's actually two main conveyors that run the entire length of this ship, which join up at several points, and it helps give the Dunsworth some small level of redundancy if you either find yourself taking damage in combat or are involved in a nasty collision. But I'm hoping that collisions are a rare thing these days. More so since I've already explained in a previous video why it's not exactly a smart idea to just burn straight towards something whilst you're flying through space. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, decreasing range and constant bearing is not a good thing, unless of course you want to be a captain of one of the most expensive guided missiles known to man. Anyway, that ladder will take us up to the CIC and officers' quarters, but right now we'll take a look at what's on this deck. If you remember, this was the entrance to the cargo bay from earlier, so we'll start off by going into the briefing room, which, as you can see, comes complete with a vending machine, a large LCD screen and a holographic table. This mainly serves as a ready room where the crew can be briefed as necessary by senior personnel, but it can also serve as a seminar room should any personnel require additional training. Another cool feature is that you can use this control panel over here to change the lighting, either by turning it off completely or just use the dim blue lighting in order to make the screen easier to see. There we go, that's everything back to normal. Now it's time to check out the next room. And here we have some guest quarters. There's some more upstairs, but these are the slightly more basic ones. And as you can see, they come complete with a shower, a basic toilet, along with 2 bunks and a desk. And there's also some lockers to store your personal belongings in as well. Also located on this deck are the airlocks. As with the other Starcruisers, there is one on each side, but unlike the others, the Xbox version uses timer blocks instead of a script in order to cycle the airlocks. It's slightly more obtrusive than using a script, but as you can see, it still works pretty damn well. The only downside, as many of you have probably noticed, is that the airlock needs to be cycled again in order for me to get back inside, which means using the jetpack to fly out and hit the button on the control panel again. Just like that. And next we have the mess hall, where the crew and passengers can eat, relax and socialise. And as you would expect with any mess hall, it's spacious, clean and has adequate seating for everyone. Another cool feature of this room is that it also has windows with retractable blast doors, so that way whenever the Dunsworth has landed, or is sitting in orbit where it's safe to do so, people can choose to look outside and gaze and wonder at the cosmos or the local scenery. Although in this case all we can see is a desert, as the spaceport is on the other side, but you get the idea. Next up we have the computer core and server room, or rather the timer block room on the Xbox version. It contains the timer blocks needed to run all the triggers for the doors and airlocks. As with the military Starcruisers, these are mostly non-essential blocks that are just used to make life easier for the crew. Any important timer blocks will be located upstairs in the CIC. And here we have the crew's armoury and storage lockers. Not only are spacesuits and repair equipment stored in here, but firearms too. Just as a safeguard in the unlikely event that this vessel is ever boarded by hostile personnel. As expected, the crew quarters come with beds and a bunk arrangement to save space. There's also a survival kit in case anyone needs emergency first aid, a sitting area for them to relax between shifts, a shower room with 2 cubicles and sinks, and on the other side of the room you can find the toilets or latrines, which are your standard affair and have their own doors for privacy. The crew quarters also has lockers for each member of the crew, and the beds themselves also come with shutters for privacy, which is very important when working in shifts and you don't want to disturb your crewmates. Near the front of the spacecraft we have the main stairwell that connects the 2 decks, as well as the hangar bay, which has its own airlock that we can cycle like so. This, as you may have already guessed, is added for safety reasons, as the hangar bay may not always be pressurised. As with the hangar bay on the other Terran Starcruisers, the Dunsworth can comfortably fit 3 small grid utility craft, such as the default mining and construction ships made by Keen for their tutorial scenario, as well as a shuttle or dropship, such as the Olympus 200 and even the venerable MS-7 Wyvern 2. In fact, you can easily dock all 3 vessel types in this hangar and still have space to safely exit and re-enter the hangar bay again without any problems, providing that you're careful and don't rush things, of course. I'll quickly fly in and out of the hangar bay just to give you guys an idea of how big it is. Now, I will admit that there are spacecraft out there with hangar bays that are a lot larger, like the Valiant from Into the Unknown for example. But in most cases, unless you plan on building a fleet of drones or starfighters, the hangar bay on the Dunsworth should be more than enough. And best of all, like with the ones on the workshop, the Xbox version uses timer blocks to open and close the hangar doors, as well as to pressurise and depressurise the hangar bay, which saves the player from having to mess around with it all manually. With all that being said, I have added a button on the control panel, so if anyone wants to manually turn the air vents in the hangar bay off and on again, then they are free to do so at their leisure. Right, now that we've taken a look at the lower decks, it's time for us to head on upstairs. The first room we come to is the medical bay, which has been deliberately placed up here so that it's easily accessible from the hangar bay, airlocks and CIC. Here you can find the usual assortment of medical scanners and healing devices that you would expect on a spacecraft of this size, as well as recovery beds, a waiting area, and even a small office for the doctor or senior medical officer. And here we have cryogenics, which, as the name suggests, contains the cryochambers that can be used to put someone in hibernation during a particularly long voyage. They can also be used to temporarily put someone in stasis if they've received injuries or have come down with an illness that requires specialist treatment that the ship's surgeon is unable to provide. And to our left here, as we head towards the CIC, we have the ladder access to the living quarters and cargo elevator. If we'd climbed that second ladder we saw earlier, then this is where it would have taken us. And these are the officers' quarters. As you can see, they are significantly larger and more luxurious than both the crew's and even the guests' quarters. But, as they say, rank does have its privileges. And those privileges also appear to include having your very own toilet and showering facilities. No bathtub though. But then again, in space, I could imagine that ending up becoming something of a safety hazard. We also have some more guest quarters up here, which are similar to the ones we saw downstairs earlier, and again, are only slightly better than the crew's quarters. But as you can see, they are slightly better lit, and they do offer a little more privacy. These would most likely be used by those who have booked passage somewhere, or by contractors and specialist members of the crew. As you can see, there's also a welcome message for any passengers that come on board. I myself won't be hanging around, but feel free to pause this video if you want to read it. And finally, we have the all-important Combat Information Centre, or CIC, which is where the captain and the other members of the crew that are responsible for commanding this spacecraft can usually be found. And unlike what is known as a bridge, the CIC is situated deep inside the vessel and is well protected behind several layers of armour, making it a lot harder to be taken out by a lucky hit or damaged in an accidental collision. The CIC has various LCDs on the walls, each of them showing you important information regarding the vessel, such as its velocity, fuel, power levels, and even the gravity outside. Each of these stations are designed to be used by certain members of the crew, such as the navigator or communications officer, while the one in the middle, which I'm just going to use, is reserved for either the captain or his executive officer. Because this vessel doesn't have an exterior bridge, I've used a camera and a transparent LCD with a HUD to create a sort of virtual cockpit. This is also backed up with several other cameras on the exterior of the Dunsworth, primarily to enhance the crew's situational awareness, and it comes in extremely useful, especially when landing or taking off. You can of course still use the exterior view, but these additional camera angles can certainly help when lining up to dock with a connector on a space station or a planet-side landing pad. Just remember that because they are all located on the hull of the vessel, those cameras will be susceptible to taking damage, as only the camera in the virtual cockpit is shielded behind panes of bulletproof glass. Anyway, enough about the finer details, let's get the spacecraft off the ground and into orbit. Even when carrying a substantial amount of cargo, the Dunsworth can take off from the alien planet that has 1.1 Earth Gs, so this Earth-like planet with its 1 G of gravity shouldn't be a problem. What I will have to bear in mind though is that because I'm showcasing the Xbox version of the Dunsworth, I've bound myself to the Xbox rules, which means no mods, and thus no speed mod, and a maximum velocity of 100 meters per second. What this means is that it will take a little longer to get into orbit and I'll burn slightly more fuel doing so, but hopefully not too much more than normal, even on a maxed size planet like this. Once I pass an altitude of around 7,000 meters, the planet's gravity will start to drop off and I'll eventually be able to turn off the hydrogen thrusters and just use the ions to take me the rest of the way into orbit. Oh, and before I forget, this vessel is 100% compatible with survival mode, as it has a refinery, assembler, medical room, and it even has that survival kit in the crew's quarters. The only problem you might come across is when building the crew elevator, as even after all these years, the projectors still don't like loading separate grids, especially ones that have blocks too close to it, as in the case of the elevator's doors. But the good news is that you can use your ingenuity to build around it in survival. It just takes a little more time. Now, I don't know if you Xbox users know this trick, but one of the ways I use to save fuel, that doesn't involve messing around with the thruster's override settings that is to just turn off the inertial dampeners and periodically boost forwards, just enough to keep your speed under the maximum allowed. The reason why I do this is because if you keep pressing the key to accelerate, or button in your case, the thrusters will burn at maximum even though you've hit 100 meters per second and can't go any faster. I am hoping that one day Keen will increase the maximum speed to 200 or possibly even 300 meters per second without us having to use mods, but that could still be a few more years away. Anyway, to save you guys from any more boredom, I'm going to skip ahead to when I reach orbit, so I'll see you there. Well everyone, that's us safely in orbit, and we only used about 20% of our hydrogen fuel to get here. Again, this will vary depending on the size of the planet and how high its gravity is, but at least it gives you guys a rough idea. So ladies and gentlemen, that pretty much wraps up this showcase video for the Dunsworth Civilian Starcruiser. I hope you found it to be informative and that you enjoy using this spacecraft in game. And for those of you that don't know where to find it, I'll provide you with a link to download it from mod.io in the description down below. Well, I'd like to wrap up by thanking you all for watching and to say a big heartfelt thanks once again to all my amazing viewers and subscribers out there, whose incredible support encourages me to keep releasing videos just like this one. So stay safe out there my friends, and until next time, this is Captain Robertson, signing off.